Hello, thank you for clicking on this video and for wanting to spend some time with me today. I plan to share about my husband and I's journey thus far to having our first baby. We've unfortunately had a couple of miscarriages along the way. And as we've been going through that, I found myself repeatedly turning to YouTube and podcasts to hear other women's stories. So I would love to help with not only documenting my own experience, but aid in sharing information for other women to learn from, to commiserate in the misery of this experience, to be honest, and to gather information so that you can create a path forward and fulfill those dreams that you're wishing to have. So if you're watching this video because it is something that you're currently going through, or if you have gone through miscarriage, I want to say how deeply sorry I am for you, that I wish I could hug and weep with every single woman who has gone through something like this. It is an unexplainable pain and a long grief process that you have to go through. So I see you, you're not alone, and you are stronger than you think you are. In telling this story, I would like to rewind quite a bit to give you the context of my experience with contraceptives and how, in manipulating my hormones over the years, how that could have possibly influenced what we've gone through in trying to conceive. So I am currently 29 and a half years old. And last year, my husband, Jimmy, and I decided to start trying for our first baby in September of 2024. But like I said, I want to set the stage and tell you about when I started taking birth control, which was back when I was 14 years old. I started by taking birth control pills, and I was on that until age about 23. And then there was a period where I came off of the birth control pill for about 6 months. And during that time, from what I remember, of course I wasn't tracking my cycles very thoroughly at this point, but I remember them being pretty regular and pretty predictable. I didn't have any severe symptoms. I had about a normal day's worth of bleeding, the 5-ish days. And then in 2020, I met my now husband, and we were talking about birth control methods. And so at that point, I started looking at my options. And at that point, I had just started kind of learning more about the holistic approach to your lifestyle. And so I didn't really want to get on the birth control pill, not to mention just the daily effort of having to take a pill is a little inconvenient. So I wanted to know my other options, and ultimately I decided to try the copper IUD, the non-hormonal one. And I had this placed at my university clinic, which I think was a mistake. In having it placed, it was the most excruciating pain of my life. I think with the providers there not being as experienced with placing things like this, as and they're not OBs, that they potentially hyper expanded my uterus, and when it was being placed, I went into what I felt like was shock, where I immediately broke out into a sweat, started crying, kind of rolling around the table uncontrollably for a little bit. And eventually I did compose myself, and Jamie picked me up, drove me home, and took care of me that day. And there were moments where I was questioning going to the hospital because I was in so much pain. But I know that getting an IUD placed is something that causes pain for a lot of women. And so I decided to tough through it. And in the following days, I got more back to normal. And then a few months later, when I was exercising, I noticed that I just felt a little sluggish and a little off. And so one day while I was in the shower, I decided to feel up inside myself to check the IUD. And it turns out that it was partially dislodged. Like, it was hanging out of my cervix about halfway. So I decided to reach out to a local women's clinic, one that I'd been to before. And I walked into that appointment saying, please get this out of me. I never want to get an IUD again. I will figure out another form of birth control. And my OB, who, like I said, I'd been with before, she sat me down and said, Anna, I hear you. I know that you had a really bad experience at the university clinic, but knowing you and knowing that you don't have like a really low pain tolerance, like, that shouldn't have happened. And I'm confident that we can place another IUD and have it be okay. Like, if that's something you're comfortable with doing. If you don't want to do it, I can just take it out. That's fine. But we just spent a while going back and forth, and ultimately I chose to have her place the hormonal Kyleena IUD. And so when she like removed the old one and placed the new IUD, I swear it was like nothing. It was like a little bee sting. Like, I felt fine, and in fact I was able to go right to the gym afterwards and get back to daily life. So I felt validated in my experience of the other one being so bad, and that it was likely at least partially due to the people who were placing it perhaps not being as experienced. So anywho, I was then on the Kyleena IUD for about 3 years. And during that time, I honestly had like no like adverse side effects. I had what I would call an abbreviated menstrual cycle during this time, in that I would have kind of a predictable period, but it was extremely light. It was just like a little bit of like brown spotting. And over these years, I felt like I was learning more and more about the potential negative long-term effects of birth control. And it was honestly something that I wanted to have removed, but I knew we would be getting married soon. And in 2024, we got married in May, and we were going on our honeymoon in June. And so leading up to that, I was like, well, I don't really want to poke the bear and like cause my skin to break out if I get this IUD taken out. I don't really want to deal with a period on my wedding day or while we're in Italy for our honeymoon. And so my like internal compromise with myself was to just get the IUD taken out as soon as we got back home from our honeymoon. And so that's what I did in June. And I had done some research on when to start conceiving, or how to best help your body to prepare for pregnancy after being on birth control. And from what I'd read, they'd recommended waiting about 3 months to allow your body's hormones to regulate, to have a normal cycle. And so that put our projected conception month at September of 2024. And from June to September, I started really dialing in on my nutrition, focusing on a very nutrient dense diet, getting sufficient calories. I started reeling back on the intensity of my workouts, doing more mobility stuff. I started working with a more functional chiropractor, and my menstrual cycles in those 3 months were seemingly normal. Again, I wasn't tracking the exact days of how long I was bleeding or how long my complete cycle was, but it was coming at a predictable time. It was kind of in that normal range. And I was diligently tracking my basal body temperature to kind of get an idea of when I was ovulating. And so when September arrived, I felt really confident with trying to get pregnant. My cycles seemed regular. I felt better and healthier than ever. And so that's what we did. And at the beginning of September, we had what I believed was a chemical pregnancy, a very early one. So we had that temperature spike from the ovulation. And then a few days later, I want to say 4 or 5 days later, I started bleeding, which was earlier than would have been expected if it was just my normal period. But I didn't take a pregnancy test or have a positive test to technically confirm that. But again, based on the timing, based on how diligently I was tracking everything, I believe that was a chemical pregnancy at the beginning of September. And so we're a little bit bummed, but we know how common it is for miscarriages to happen, especially those really early ones, and we know it can take a while. So at the end of the month, after I'd had that cycle, I had ovulated again and we became pregnant again. And in October, we had the positive pregnancy test, and I was starting to have all of the symptoms like the sore breast, the fatigue. I had certain food aversions and cravings, and just what seemed to be a normal, healthy pregnancy. And at 9 weeks, we went into our midwife group, and they were just going to use the Doppler. So it wasn't their full new client appointment, but it was just kind of a check-in just to look at the baby. And with the Doppler, so I was laying on their couch. I had my legs draped over my husband, and they had the little Doppler that was hooked up to their laptop. And the Doppler is a less sophisticated version of the ultrasound technology. And so going into it, we knew that we may not see everything and we may not see a heartbeat. That could be normal. And when my midwife was using it on my belly, she was pointing out, okay, your uterus is enlarged. That looks like the size that we want to see, but I'm having difficulty seeing the baby. And they thought that it could be that I was earlier along than I thought, or it could have been just the position of my uterus was making it difficult to see. And so they ordered us to have another ultrasound. I was with the midwives on Tuesday. The ultrasound was set up on a Friday. And since the midwives had not mentioned miscarriage at that point, right when I left the appointment, I was feeling okay, but the more I thought about it, the more I was could this possibly be a miscarriage? And so, like I said at the beginning, I turned to YouTube, start gathering information, and I learned about the different types of miscarriages and realized that missed miscarriages are a thing. And so those days were slow between Tuesday and Friday, waiting on that ultrasound and starting to get nervous that we had a miscarriage. And so I go into the ultrasound appointment on my own on Friday. My husband had offered to take off, but I was like, no, it's okay. And even though, like I said, we were nervous about miscarriage, I also was kind of operating under this ignorance is bliss state of mind and wanted to be optimistic. And so I went into the imaging place, and the ultrasound tech, bless her heart, she was so sweet. And if you don't know, the ultrasound techs, like, their job is to just collect the information and then report that back to your provider who had ordered the ultrasound, and then your provider is the one to call you to actually talk through the diagnosis. So I wasn't sure if the ultrasound tech would say anything to me or not, but whenever she was using the ultrasound on my abdomen, after a few seconds, she had turned to me and said that, I'm so sorry, but I don't see a baby, and this looks like what is called a blighted ovum. And so it's a miscarriage where the baby stops developing really early on, but your body doesn't recognize it. And she told me that this is not my fault. And she actually told me that this is something that she had gone through at one point too. And she tried to encourage me and said that she now has her daughter. And yeah, she was just so sweet. And it was so, like, comforting in a way for her to just go ahead and tell me, so that I didn't have to go through a period of, like, waiting for my midwife to call me. And yeah, she was just very sweet, and I was really grateful for her. I was holding myself together until I was able to get out to the car. I called Jimmy, I told him what had happened, and so we headed home, and he left work immediately, and we'd entered a period of grief that was really intense. I've never cried so hard for so long. There's so much that you have to come to terms with when you go through something like this. It's not only that you're losing the baby, but you have to let go of the timeline for your life that you had created and were planning for. You feel heartbroken for your partner. You have to call and let your relatives know, and to hear them going through heartbreak with you, it was really intense and very devastating. But I was grateful that it was over a weekend, so Jimmy and I just sat and grieved together. But the thing with a missed miscarriage is that you can't really just stay in the mode of grief, because you have to figure out now how to manage your miscarriage. And with us not being very far along, and that the baby had stopped developing, like, very early, like before 4 weeks, before anything was able to be detected on an ultrasound, that gave us 3 options for how to proceed. We could do expectant management, where we're just watching and waiting for things to happen naturally. And the midwives had let me know that oftentimes, once your brain understands and comprehends what has happened, that the baby has passed away, that your body will follow suit. It will eventually miscarry. But that is an unpredictable timeline. That could take hours, days, weeks, months. It's hard to say. And with that form of management, you could start going through a miscarriage at any time. It could happen at work. It's very inconvenient, could be traumatic for some people. The second method that we were considering was misoprostol, or Cytotec. It's a medication that you can take in the comfort of your own home. It induces contractions and can aid in removing the products of conception. And there are some risks associated with this. It's another thing that can be really traumatizing for women, to have to see your body pass the tissue. And the medication doesn't always work for women, and you could start experiencing really heavy bleeding, and it could turn into an emergency situation where you have to go to the hospital. And then the third option that I had was to get a DNC surgery, dilation and curettage, to clear out all of the products of conception. That's typically something that you're put under general anesthesia for. There are some providers that can do it with local anesthesia, but I'd say it's not as common, because with that, if the mom is awake and turning, then they could move while the procedure is being done, and there's a higher risk of your uterus being punctured. And with getting a DNC, there's also the risk for scarring. It's the most invasive option, but you do get to schedule it. You don't have to be faced with the trauma of passing it on your own. So there are different pros and cons to all of these options, and no great or clear option. So we decided to wait about 2 weeks to see if my body would start passing it on its own, and I really had made no progress. So I then decided to take the misoprostol. And for this part of the video, this can be a little bit graphic or unsettling or traumatizing for some people. So if that is not something that you're interested in hearing about, please fast forward. I will be talking about blood, products of conception, etc. So I took the medication on a Saturday, like early evening. It was around 5 p.m. I'd taken it as a suppository vaginally, and I started feeling a little crummy. You get like a little bit of like light cramping. You start getting little chills, maybe a little headache, a little stomach ache. But it took a few hours before I started passing any blood clots, and it started off small, but then and I was spending a lot of time on the toilet. There was a moment where there was a large gush of blood. There were larger clots that were starting to come out. So then I started to flip between being in the shower and being on the toilet, going back out to the couch with Jimmy. And for me, I think because I had time to process the loss prior to passing the tissue, that that act was not traumatizing for me. I actually felt like it was empowering. Some of the cramps were moderately intense. Again, I didn't feel good. It's like you have diarrhea, but it was something that it was good to feel like we were finally moving forward, that we can finally reset my body, and we can properly pass the tissue. And I felt like I'd already said goodbye to my baby, but this was, that final step. And because I took it later in the day, which is a little bit regrettable, we were up very late with just managing it. And so eventually, in the wee hours of the morning, I finally went to sleep. And then the next day I passed more clots, my largest one being about the size of my fist, or about the size of like a tennis ball. It's like very fibrous, kind of muscly almost, tissue, and then a lot of like blood clots. The blood clots kind of disintegrate. So yeah, after that happened on a Sunday, I kind of entered what I would consider as like a heavy period for about a week. And then I had multiple weeks of spotting on and off. And then the bleeding picked up again, which that was a little bit confusing for me because since I didn't actually like fully stop bleeding, I was questioning, I'm like, is this still the miscarriage? Did I not pass all of the tissue? Because that's the body's way of flushing out that tissue, is to make you bleed. So I decided to go into a new OB that was farther up north where I live. And I requested a repeated pregnancy loss panel, which I don't technically know if that's what they did, but it was something that like they took several vials of blood to test different metrics. And I also did a transvaginal ultrasound. And I met with a nurse practitioner. She had said that all of my blood work looked normal and checked out, which like she wasn't going into detail about everything. And now that this has become a recurrent thing, that's something that I want to dive back into and that I wish she would have done. But it did at least ease my mind that there weren't any big red flags that were going on with this this blood work. But with the ultrasound, she said that they found what they called an indeterminate nodule that was in my uterus, kind of near the cervix. And she was questioning if that was a polyp or retained tissue that did not pass with taking the medication. And so hearing that, it was a blow. I was pretty upset. And because I felt a little frantic, I think, like she was telling me, you can either wait a while, you can do another ultrasound down the road, but like I think more than likely you're just going to need a little surgical procedure, like what they call like a hysteroscopy, where they take a camera inside of your uterus, and if they see a polyp or see tissue, then they clear it out. So it's similar to a DNC, but a little bit different, and depends on what they see in there. So I was kind of like, well, like I want to get this over with, like let's schedule a surgery. And the gal had said that I need to first meet with the OB, since she would be the one actually doing the procedure. So we set up that appointment. That was January of 2025. And they called me the day before the appointment and say that, hey, like you can still have the appointment, but you need to come to North Kansas City Hospital instead of our usual OB office because the OB office is flooded. And this will be relevant in the story. So we go to the appointment, meet with the OB, and we talk about options for anesthetic with going through with this, the like surgery technically. And I was telling her that my preference would be local anesthesia because I don't like being put under. I don't want the financial aspect of that. Like I think I would be a good candidate for just doing local anesthesia. And the OB agreed, said that would be a good option. And so we scheduled the surgery back at the hospital. And in that scheduling, because it was pretty shortly after, like I thought maybe it was scheduled back there because the OB office was still having issues with flooding. But then right before the surgery day, I'm getting a call from the hospital saying, hey, like you need to make sure to not eat after midnight, not wear your contacts, things like that they tell people who are getting put under for surgery. And so I said, hey, like this isn't what my OB and I agreed to, like we're just doing local anesthesia. And the people on the phone were like, oh, well, that's fine. It's our hospital policy to tell everyone who's going to be in the hospital to follow these guidelines just in case something goes wrong and we have a change of plan. So I was like, okay. And, 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 so I was like, okay then we go into the hospital, which we had taken off work for this, obviously, and get all checked in. I get in my gown, and the nurse comes in and is trying to put an IV in my arm. And I again said, like, no, this isn't the plan. I'm not wanting to be put under. I want to do local anesthesia. That's what my OB and I agreed to. She said, oh, okay, let me go talk to the anesthesiologist. The anesthesiologist comes in and he says, well, it's our hospital policy that if you're in the operating room that you have to have an IV in your arm. So even if you're not getting put under, you still have to have it there just in case, and thus you will have the fee for local anesthesia since they would be monitoring me. And he's like, well, let me talk to the OB when she arrives. And when the OB gets there, which they were talking about, like maybe there's another room outside of the operating room that they can do this procedure if she's just wanting to do local anesthesia. But the OB comes back and she's like, I'm sorry, I didn't know that this was the hospital policy, because their office had just switched from using Liberty Hospital to North Kansas City Hospital. So I think I was literally like her first surgery, which was a little annoying because like if you're scheduling patients for something like this, like you should be given proper informed consent about it. I shouldn't be finding out while I'm in my hospital gown that about this policy that I wasn't told about. And the OB had also asked me if I was still having irregular bleeding. And at that point I told her no, because after, like I told you, I had spotting and then the bleeding had picked up. I think that was like a normal period, because then after that I had stopped bleeding, and right before I came in for the surgery I had another like pretty normal period. And she said, oh, well, since you had that happen, that's probably a good sign that your body is regulating everything. And I wasn't fully convinced that you even had a polyp or had retained tissue to begin with. So if you want to go back to trying on your own, you're welcome to do that. Or I can give you the number of my friend who does the hysteroscopy in her office so you can avoid some of these hospital fees. And my husband and I were just like, what? Like, are you serious? We're just very unhappy with how all of this had played out. So we left the hospital and decided that we would just step back for a little bit and we'd see how my cycle was, go back to just like trying on our own. And so I had a couple of periods, and I did notice in that time that my luteal phase seemed short, because again, I could tell based on temperature like when I was ovulating, and then I started bleeding a little bit sooner than I would have thought. Not so soon in that I thought it was a chemical pregnancy, because I know I mentioned that in September, but just that my period came a couple days early, indicating that my luteal phase was a little bit shorter. And then in March, we conceived again. But I think for now, this video is getting very long, so I'm going to end that here. And I will make another video to talk about what I'm counting as my third pregnancy that did ultimately end up being another missed miscarriage. But I'll tell you the details of that in another video. I just wanted to kind of give you my background in this video and start telling you about my first experience with a missed miscarriage. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to leave those in the comments below, and feel free to reach out to me. My Instagram is Anna Chris Dixon, Dixon. Feel free to reach out to me there as well. And again, just know that I really feel for you if you're going through something like this, and I will be praying for you. And thank you for listening to my story thus far, and I'll be excited to give you updates moving forward.